We are going to be preparing for a Socratic seminar in this class. Can somebody turn the lights off for me, please? I'm going to tell you. Has anybody heard of the philosopher Socrates? He's an ancient Greek philosopher. His most famous student was Plato, and he was famous for coming up with this method of learning called the Socratic seminar, where you learn things through asking questions. So I might say to you, what's the weather like today, Samantha? And Samantha would say to me, I don't know. What do you think it looks like out there today? And I would say, I think it looks gray and foggy. Does that mean that it's going to rain? Do you see how I'm answering questions with questions?
You just did that with her. Why did they kill everybody?
Correct.
Why did you think?
You guys understand that?
Teachers do it all the time.
Okay? So that's a method of learning, because the theory is that as you're questioning, you're going deeper and deeper until you solve the issue. Okay? I do that all the time. Sometimes when I'm at home at night, I lay in bed and I Google things, because my husband will say something and I don't know what it is that he said, so I'll Google that. And then that'll lead me to Google something else, and then that'll lead me to Google. Do you guys do that?
Yeah.
That's a Socratic method of learning, because you're questioning. You're answering a question with a question with a question, and so you're getting to the root of the issue, and so you learn what you need to know. Okay? So, correct. So a Socratic seminar in a classroom is not quite the same. It's been adapted a bit. What you guys are going to be doing is you're going to be creating questions and asking each other the questions while there's not people, and I sit here and listen and watch and take notes. Okay? And you guys are going to be teaching each other through a series of questions. All right? And we're going to give you the tools that you need, but you're going to be the one coming up with the questions. Okay? So let's look at the assignment. It says directions. Read each article and clearly annotate each one. Annotate, circle that word please, means you're going to circle and define unknown words, at least 2 unknown words per article, and I don't think that you'll have any problems there. And then you're going to highlight or underline at least 3 moments in each article that make you think or question or connect. After you do that, you will turn those highlights into at least 3 marginal questions or comments that prove you are identifying ideas and making connections. So quite different from just sitting and reading and getting to the end and saying, I don't know what I just read. You're going to be actively reading, engaging with the text, making connections, asking questions. All right? You're going to complete the reading for meaning chart for each article. You're going to then write 10 level 4 through 6 questions in preparation for the Socratic seminar and record them on your note cards. All right, so I'm going to give you level 4 through 6 questions. I'm going to give you question stems so that to help you write those questions, and I'm going to give you note cards to write them on. All right? Does everybody understand so far? When I say level 4 through 6, there's a guy named Bloom who came up with this thing called Bloom's taxonomy, and it's to show how we learn. So that it's like a triangle, and at the very top you have understanding, recognizing, identifying, and at the very bottom you have creating. And so it goes from a very simplistic kind of learning where you're just identifying things and recalling things to this other type of learning where you're engaging and you're creating and you're making things happen. Okay? So Bloom came up with these 6 levels of learning and questioning, and I want you guys on the top, or I guess you could say the bottom 4, 5, and 6, which is analyzing, synthesizing, and creating, so that you're using your higher order thinking skills, so that you're not just sitting there like this and identifying and then walking out the room and forgetting. Does everybody understand what I'm saying? Okay. So here's how you're going to be graded. This is on your reading, okay? You're aiming for a number 5. Mature thinking is obvious. The student makes required notes and highlights and defines unknown words. Questions and comments show the reader is identifying ideas and connecting to the content. Statements show thought and insight. All right? I need to see that you're really thinking and coming up with questions and comments, that you're making these connections. And how will your questions be graded? We're aiming again for a 5. Student generates 10 questions. Each question is unique, thoughtful, and insightful. All are at levels 4 through 6, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation or creation. All right? you're going to be graded. So now let's start looking at these charts. And I gave you the first article already, and I'm going to go through that article with you. Okay? So it says at the top here, reading for meaning and purpose chart. The purpose of this exercise is to hone your ability to gather textual evidence to support or refute an assertion. For each statement below, circle whether you feel the evidence from the article you read supports or refutes that statement. Then share quoted textual evidence from the article to support your answer. Make sure the parenthetical documentation is included. All right, so you've got a couple of things that we're doing here. What do you think the first step is in this exercise?
What do you define as view?
First tell me what you think the first step in the exercise is. Eddie. Read the article, okay? Now let's look at the directions here and break it down, okay? As you're reading, what are you going to be doing? Circling words you don't know, and what else? What you don't understand, underlining, making connections, asking questions, all right? Then you're going to go through this chart, and you have 4 questions here or statements here that come from the reading, okay? Another word for a statement or a claim is an assertion, okay? So right here, that's a claim. Maybe you want to write it down. This? Okay. All right. If I say support or refute an assertion or a claim, what does the word refute mean? What do you think? Which is? Going against it. Okay? Disprove it. All right? So, going against, we'll say. Good. All right? For each statement, circle whether you feel the evidence from the article you read supports or refutes that statement. Then share quoted textual evidence from the article to support your answer. All right? Here's where you guys struggle a lot. You'll be able to say to me, George Steinbeck is showing the human nature of relationships, right? Then you'll say, Lenny said, I'm going to choke you, lady. And then that's it. That's the end of your paragraph, right? How does that quote support what you said? How does it support it? Does it support it? It doesn't, right? And I say that I write on your paper, drive-by quoting. How does this make any sense? Because you guys you have trouble going into the text and finding a quote that supports. So you end up just going like this, opening your book, flipping the pages, and going like this, and then putting that quote in. Okay? And then you say, but Mrs. Groff, I had 3 quotes. They don't support what you're trying to say, and even furthermore, you don't explain how it supports it. All right? That's where you guys struggle a lot in your reading and your writing when you try to show us that you're making meaning of what you're reading. Okay? So that's what this exercise is going to help you do. When it says hone, it means strengthen that ability. Okay? All right, so let's look at the article. What is parenthetical documentation? Does anybody remember? Parenthetical documentation. It says make sure the parenthetical documentation is included. What does that mean? What do you think? What page it's on? Correct. The author of the page number, remember? Parenthetical documentation. What's the root of the word parenthetical? Paren. So what does that mean? What does it go in? Parentheses. Documentation. What does that mean? Documenting where your information came from. Okay? So let's look at this first article. For the worst of us, the diagnosis may be evil. I'm going to show you how to annotate. All right? As I'm reading, I'm going to tell you what I'm thinking. I'm going to be circling words. I'm going to be making comments and questions. I want you to do exactly what I'm doing on your paper. Okay? All right. For the worst of us, the diagnosis may be evil. And here is the author, Benedict Carey. Predatory killers often do far more than commit murder. Some have lured their victims into homemade chambers for prolonged torture. Others have exotic tastes for vivisection, sexual humiliation, burning. Okay? I don't know what this word is, so I'm going to circle it. Many perform their grisly rituals as much for pleasure as for any other reason. Among themselves, a few forensic scientists have taken to thinking of these people as not merely disturbed, but evil. Evil in that their deliberate, habitual savagery defies any psychological explanation or attempt at treatment. Most psychiatrists assiduously, I don't know that word, so I'm going to circle it, avoid the word evil, contending that its use would precipitate a dangerous slide from clinical to moral judgment that could put people on death row unnecessarily and obscure the understanding of violent criminals. Still, many career forensic examiners say their work forces them to reflect on the concept of evil, and some acknowledge that they can find no other term for certain individuals they have evaluated. In an effort to standardize what makes a crime particularly heinous, I'm unsure about that word, so I'm going to circle it, Dr. Michael Wellner, an associate professor of psychiatry at New York University, has been developing what he calls a depravity scale, which rates the horror of an act by the sum of its grim details. I'm going to underline this. Dr. Michael Wellner, an associate professor of psychiatry at New York University. Because here the writer is establishing what we call ethos, which means this guy knows what he's talking about. He's an expert. I'm going to make you understand that this is the truth because this guy's an expert on this. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay, that's what that means. Ethos is like, it's ethical. It's this guy is showing you that he is an expert on it. So because he's quoting an expert and this guy is an associate professor of psychiatry at NYU, that he knows what he's talking about because of this. Okay? So I wrote there, establishing ethos. All right, let's keep going. And a prominent personality expert at Columbia University has published a 22-level hierarchy of evil behavior derived from detailed biographies of more than 500 violent criminals. He is now working on a book urging the profession not to shrink from thinking in terms of evil when appraising certain offenders, even if the E word cannot be used as part of an official examination or diagnosis. Do you have a question? We are talking about people who commit breathtaking acts, who do so repeatedly, who know what they're doing, and are doing it in peacetime, under no threat to themselves, said Dr. Michael Stone, the Columbia psychiatrist who has examined several hundred killers at Mid-Hudson Psychiatric Center in New Hampton, New York, and others at Creedmoor Psychiatric Center in Queens. Wow, this is some run-on sentence, where he consults and teaches. Again, establishing ethos, okay? You see how he's giving you all of the credentials of this guy? I know what I'm talking about because look at all the credentials this guy has, okay? What did you say, hon? First. Always the first. What? Always the first time. You said the first time they talk about him or the second, right? Always the first time. Okay? All right. Yeah, it's a different doctor. Again. Yes. I said again, right? Yeah. Okay. We know from experience who these people are and how they behave. And it is time, he said, to give their behavior the proper appellation. I'm unsure about that word, so I'm going to circle it. Western religious leaders, evolutionary theorists, and psychological researchers agree that almost all human beings have the capacity to commit brutal acts, even when they are not directly threatened. I'm going to underline this. Almost all human beings have the capacity to commit brutal acts, even when they are not directly threatened. And I'm going to put a little exclamation point next to it, because I'm making some sort of, that made me feel something, okay? I felt like when he said that, I was like, it just kind of like made me feel icky. I don't know why. So I underlined it and I put a little exclamation point next to it, and I'll go back to it, okay? In Dr. Stanley Milgram's famous electroshock experiments in the 1960s, Participants delivered what they thought were punishing electric jolts to a fellow citizen, merely because they were encouraged to do so by an authority figure as part of a learning experiment. Turn page. In the real world, the grim images coming out of Iraq, the beheadings by Iraqi insurgents, and the Abu Ghraib tortures, complete with preening guards, suggest how much further people can go when they feel justified. I'm going to underline that too. They feel justified. In Nazi prisoner camps, as during purges in Kosovo and Cambodia, historians found that clerks, teachers, bureaucrats, and other normally peaceable citizens committed some of the gruesome violence, apparently swept along in the kind of collective thoughtlessness that the philosopher Hannah Arendt described as the banality of evil. I'm going to underline that because I think that that's a book. So I'm making a connection there. I'm pretty sure that that's a book. Evil is endemic. It's constant. It is a potential in all of us. Just about everyone has committed evil acts, said Dr. Robert I. Simon, a clinical professor of psychiatry at Georgetown Medical School and the author of Bad Men Do What Good Men Dream. Dr. Simon considers the notion of evil to be of no use to forensic psychiatry, in part because evil is ultimately in the eye of the beholder, shaped by political and cultural as well as religious values. I'm going to underline that. In the eye of the beholder, shaped by political and cultural as well as religious values. You don't have to do it every time. I just did it the first time. Because now what I'm doing is, every time they do that, I'm acknowledging in my brain that that's what they've done. Okay? That they're establishing credibility. They're establishing credibility. Like, once I do it the first time, it's ingrained in my brain, and then I don't have to do it again and again. Okay? All right, the connection that I'm making here, I'm going to ask a question. Does this mean that what we think is evil may not be considered evil in other cultures? Okay. The terrorists on September 11th thought that they were serving God, he argues. Those who kill people at abortion clinics also claim to be doing so. If the issue is history's most transcendent savages, on the other hand, most people agree that Hitler and Pol Pot would qualify. Look him up. Okay? When you start talking about evil, psychiatrists don't know anything more about it than anyone else, Dr. Simon said. Our opinions might carry more weight under the patina or authority of the profession. I'm going to circle that word because I don't know what that means. But the point is, you can call someone evil, and so can I. So what? What does it add? Dr. Stone argues that one possible benefit of including a consideration of evil may be a more clear-eyed appreciation of who should be removed from society and not allowed back. He is not an advocate of the death penalty, he said, and his interest in evil began long before President Bush began using the word to describe terrorists or hostile regimes. Dr. Stone's hierarchy of evil is topped by the names of many infamous criminals who were executed or locked up for good. Theodore R. Bundy, the former law school student convicted of killing 2 young women in Florida and linked to dozens of other killings in the 1970s. John Wayne Gacy of Illinois, the convicted killer who strangled more than 30 boys and buried them under his house. And Ian Brady, who, with his girlfriend, Myra Hindley, tortured and killed children in England in a rampage in the 1960s known as the Moors Murders. But another killer on the hierarchy is Albert Fentress, a former school teacher in Poughkeepsie, New York, examined by Dr. Stone, who killed and cannibalized a teenager in 1979. Mr. Fentress petitioned to be released from a state mental hospital, and in 1999, a jury agreed that he was ready. He later withdrew the petition when prosecutors announced that a new witness would testify against him. At a hearing in 2001, Dr. Stone argued against Mr. Fentress's release, and the idea that the killer might be considered ready to make his way back into society still makes the psychiatrist's eyes widen. Researchers have found that some people who commit violent crimes are much more likely than others to kill or maim again. And one way they measure this potential is with a structured examination called the psychopathy checklist. I'm going to underline this, and I'm going to underline this word measure, because how can we measure something that is objective with math and checklists? And what I'm referring to is what I underlined up here. Okay? So this guy, Dr. Simon, is saying evil is in the eye of the beholder. It's objective. What you think is evil, I might not think is evil, right? But some other researchers say that we can measure evil on this sliding scale with a checklist. But how do we measure something that's objective? How do we measure something that's in the eye of the beholder with a scale and mathematics and a checklist? How do we do that? I'm like, I can't really reconcile that in my head. Okay? I'm going to move this up so that you can see it. Can you see that? Math and a checklist. As part of an extensive, in-depth interview, a trained examiner rates the offender on a 20-item personality test. Here's my answer. The items include glibness and superficial charm. I'm going to circle that word. Grandiose self-worth, pathological lying, proneness to boredom, and emotional vacuity. So we're going to circle that and look it up. The subjects earn 0 points for if the description is not applicable. 2 points if it is highly applicable, and 1 if it is somewhat or sometimes true. The psychologist who devised the checklist, Dr. Robert Hare, a professor emeritus at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, said that average total scores varied from below 5 in the general population to the low 20s in prison populations, to a range of 30 to 40 highly psychopathic and predatory killers. In a series of studies, criminologists have found that people who score in the high range are 2 to 4 times as likely as any other prisoners to commit another crime when released. More than 90% of the men and a few women at the top of Dr. Stone's hierarchy qualify as psychopaths. Me neither. So that's why I kind of just like flew through that paragraph, because that's how I read. I said I kind of get like a couple of things in here, okay? He's saying, in this paragraph, he's proving how the scale works by saying this many people do this once they're released, this many people, here's how I'm proving that I'm right and that this works, okay? But when I read, because I'm not a numbers person, I tend to skip through the numbers. I'm like, oh, 90% is a high number. Okay, got it. Check. All right? That's just how I read, because I'm just not a math person. How does he what? He's asked them questions. He does interviews with them, right? So it says down here, he says he does an in-depth interview, and he looks for these things. Glibness, which is like kind of like bragging about what they've done, okay? Superficial charm, like being like overly charming, right? Grandiose self-worth, meaning like they think really, really highly of themselves. Pathological lying when they don't even realize that they're doing it about things that they don't need to lie about. The sky's blue. No, it's not. It's green. The sky is green. The sky is green today. And they don't even realize that they're lying. Proneness to boredom means like they're easily bored by things. And emotional vacuity. Vacuity is like emptiness. Like they have no emotion. Okay?
You still can't do that.
I'm pretending like I'm you. Okay. So they earn 0 points if this description doesn't apply, 2 points if it highly applies, and 1 if it is somewhat or sometimes true. You understand? So it's like a scale, okay? All right. And then, like I said, I kind of flew through this paragraph because I understand that he's proving his point, and he's saying that this many people did this and that and the other thing, and they qualify, all right? In recent years, neuroscientists have found evidence that psychopathy scores reflect physical differences in brain function. Last April, Canadian and American researchers reported a brain imaging study that psychopaths process certain abstract words, grace, future, power, for example, differently from non-psychopaths. In addition, preliminary findings from new imaging research have revealed apparent oddities in the way psychopaths mentally process certain photographs, like graphic depictions of accident scenes, said Dr. Kent Keel, an assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at Yale, a lead author on both studies. Okay, I'm just going to put like a little caret thingy there. I don't really know what you would call that. Because I'm making a connection here. When I worked in Newark, we did this whole study about the effect of trauma on the brain and how kids who live in an urban setting where bullets are flying and there's gang violence, their brains actually form differently than a kid who lives in New Milford, okay? Because they're still in the developmental stage, right? So their brain actually, if they took the brain out of the kid in Newark and they took a brain out of Sarah and they looked at the two brains, the kid in Newark, the brain would actually physically look different than Sarah's brain, okay? So I made a connection here to kids in Newark. All right, here's what I want you to do for homework. I want you to finish annotating this article exactly as we've been doing it, okay? And then tomorrow, I'm going to teach you guys how to do finding the textual evidence to support the assertions, all right?